So will Penn State make the college football playoff in 2024? That shouldn't even be up for debate. The answer is yes. But the question we should be asking is how well they're going to do in that expanded bracket.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, Penn State fans? That is right. You are Locked On Nittany Lions. Thanks so much for making us your first listen and watch every single day. We are free and available wherever you can get your podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Zach Seyko, bringing you all things Penn State sports coverage, talking football, talking men's basketball, wrestling, men's hockey, recruiting. On this episode, football and recruiting, as we debate if Penn State's going to make the college football playoff, the new expanded one, and we bring back the recruiting expert himself to debate just that and talk about the latest when it comes to Penn State high school football recruiting. And that is Brian Smith, recruiting expert of the Locked On Podcast Network. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. And right now, new customers, when you join today, you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. And if you're not already, become an everyday or subscribe to the channel on YouTube, wherever you get your podcast, for all the latest analysis around your favorite Penn State sports, truly on this show, Locked On Nittany Lions. So, Brian, I think this is a fair point of topic here. College football playoff expands, and the reason there's a little bit of inspiration behind this because we're still far away from the 2024 regular season. But ESPN and Greg McElroy seem to be very confident. At least McElroy won a national championship, starting quarterback at Alabama, so he knows a little bit, a thing or two about college ball, Brian. But in this case, he says that Penn State's the second best team in the Big Ten behind Ohio State. So that means he has them higher than the likes of Oregon, Washington, USC, Michigan. I know they're going through some changes and stuff, but he has Ohio State and Penn State at 1 and 2. And ESPN puts Penn State as a 70% chance of making the 12-team college football playoff. And I say, duh. For me, yes, they absolutely make the 12-team playoff because they've always been in this situation. They have always been inside of the top 15. I know the top 12. They've always been around that part. It's getting to the semifinal. It's getting into the top 4 that's been a little difficult for James Franklin and company. But is this just because the field goal posts are changed? Because the new line to cross, Brian, is to get to that next round. You win the opening. If you make it, either get into the top 4 and get that bye, or just simply win your first round. So for Penn State, I say absolutely yes, 100%. If everything right, you don't want any injuries, but I think things go well in 2024. They make the college football playoff. It's just a matter if they win that first round or even get the bye.
Well, that comes down to the Ohio State game. Maybe something else. I don't know their schedule off the top of my head, but maybe they play Oregon in the conference championship. I mean, there's a lot of different ifs, and the Big Ten's not going to get any easier. I know Michigan will probably take a step back after the coaching changes and all that, but it's not like the Big Ten is easy. If they go 11-1 in the regular season, and even if they lost in the title game, they're going to get in. Now the question is how the ranking stuff. There's a lot of politics with that. That matters. The home game, especially if they played a Southern team, you want to be in Happy Valley. That wouldn't be good for the Southern team. So I'd imagine they got a great chance at it. If they could get a top 4 seed, though, after you play in the title game in the Big Ten, I mean, if you won the Big Ten, you only got to play 2 playoff games to win it. That's the difference.
Well, and that's going to be, I guess, the new measuring stick here, right? James Franklin, because I don't look at the first round of the college football playoff any different than I do in New Year's Six Bowl. Because what's the point of getting into the playoff if you just have an early first round exit? So nothing really changes in my mind. So this question of, they absolutely make the 12-team college football playoff because it's no different than a New Year's Six Bowl. We've seen Penn State time and time again, whether they win them or they not, or they don't, they do make the New Year's Six Bowls without any issues. Of course, 2021 was a different story. They went to the former Outback Bowl, lost to Arkansas and everything. But other than that, James Franklin has been very good at getting them to that spot. So I feel like there's nothing different here. So the question of, is Penn State a top 12 team? They most definitely are. It's now, can they push past that? Can they win that playoff game? And there's the whole debate about opt-outs and everything else. Could we see players opt out of a a early round college football playoff game or anything like that? Because yes, you do in the Peach Bowl, but now there's a little more meaning to it. If you win, you go to the next round. And we've seen Penn State again. They win games. They win the Rose Bowl. They win the Fiesta Bowl. They win the Cotton Bowl. But they lose the Peach Bowl. They lose the other Rose Bowl against USC. So it's not like Penn State has this utter dominance of a hypothetical first round in this case of the new college football playoff, if these are the former New Year's Six Bowls in this case.
Well, I don't think Penn State will. Now, there might be somebody else, maybe an LSU player or something, but Penn State kids are usually a little different. So I don't think that's going to be a factor at all. If they've got a chance to go win a title, I think those kids will stay in Happy Valley, be happy to represent their school. That's simple as that for me.
And I think that would just be such a bad look. The first game, the first round ever of the new 12-team college football playoff, and you say, "Nah, I'm good. I'm going to opt out. There's no point. I'm going to focus on my draft stock and everything else." That honestly, playing in that game will probably help your draft stock more than if you opt out. I don't care what any agent tries to tell a player.
The agent just wants the kid healthy for the NFL Combine.
For the commission.
That's correct. That's it. I don't think anybody's surprised by that either.
Yeah. But we agree that Penn State is a top 12 program, especially going into the season. Now, I have to admit, I do think Oregon is better on paper. Greg McElroy might think differently. He says that Ohio State and Penn State are firmly in his top two, and he doesn't understand why people aren't talking about Penn State enough. As an SEC guy, Greg, as you're an SEC guy, I appreciate that quite a bit. However, I do look at what Oregon's done. I look at the fact that Oregon has put together a top 10 class from 2024. They dominated the transfer portal. They can't go wrong with what they have at quarterback because they got not one, but two capable starters in Dylan Gabriel and Dante Moore from UCLA. Gabriel was at Oklahoma. So you get not only a veteran, but then a guy with the utmost potential that still hasn't been unlocked. So right now, as I sit here before the next transfer portal window, unless Penn State makes some more additions, I got to admit that Ohio State and Oregon are probably my top two at this point, with Penn State as a little bit of a distant third.
I think that Oregon's interesting because they got the right transfer at quarterback. At least it seems that way. Mm-hmm. And experience at quarterback, as we both know, matters. Having seen Drew play a full year, I'm guessing that's why Greg thinks, okay, this kid's got a rocket arm. He can make all the weird throws that kind of mimic a certain guy from Kansas City that's going to the Super Bowl again. And maybe they're going to find a way to score some points this year. He's a quarterback, so he's going to believe in other quarterbacks. But Oregon's pretty enticing. I mean, they got a 60-year quarterback that's going to finish with, arguably the most yards in college football history. Dylan Gabriel and those guys will be tough, but that shows you the Big Ten in general. When you're having a debate for who's number two, possibly, the Big Ten's still really good, even if Michigan does take a step back. So that at the very least, for me, that's going to help Penn State get into the college football playoff. If Ohio State, Oregon, and Penn State don't make it, my first question is, which one of those three teams lost their quarterback to injury? That would be my first question, because they should all three make it. Which order it ends up being, that's debatable.
I mean, I'm not sleeping on the likes of Washington. I'm not sleeping on USC either, because they still have good coaches. Jed Fish, look what he did in the turnaround with Arizona and what he's been able to do right now, retain kids from leaving Washington, bring people over from Arizona as well. It's not like Washington, just because they lost Kalen DeBoer to Alabama, means that they're not going to be in the conversation as well. Again, it's expanded. It is now, didn't go from 4 to 6. It went from 4 to 12. So you have that many more available spots. And I view Washington as that kind of competitive team. I wouldn't even sleep on Wisconsin in this case, with Luke Fickell going into another season as well. So and let's not forget about Michigan State. They got another quarterback. They got a good coach, Jonathan Smith, who turned Oregon State around in a quick matter of time. That's very impressive. Like, the Big Ten is truly a gauntlet. And Brian, the last question I want to pose here, does 9-3 get you into the 12-team playoff? I think it does, but it depends. Because Penn State playing the toughest schedule in recent memory, honestly, the toughest schedule I've ever seen, and I'm in my late 20s, right? So maybe the early 2000s, the 90s, and the 80s might have posed something different. But in Penn State's case, to play all of these teams in the same season. Washington, you got to go to USC, and then you get a bye week, but then you have to go back on the road to Camp Randall and play that better, improved Wisconsin team. You also got UCLA. You got Ohio State. I'm really not concerned about the location of Ohio State, the fact that you still have to play them regardless. And then let's throw in West Virginia to start your season, an improved team, an improved program under Neil Brown as of late. And there's really no part of the schedule outside of the cupcake games from the MAC conference where Penn State gets a break, where they get a breather.
Well, if they go 9-3, they better lose 23-20 to Ohio State, 27-23 to UCLA. You know what I mean?
Right.
They can't have the kind of games they lost last year. So the 9-3 to get in, you got to be dominant. I don't know what the scores will be or how the look test will go, but based on how it was this last year, it wouldn't have been good enough. You know what I mean? Like losing in those manners that they'd have lost 3 games like that. So do I think Penn State should get in? Yeah, but I think they should win at least 10 games next year. 9-3 puts you in peril.
So you're essentially thinking Ohio State and a mulligan, because that's what I'm led to believe. I would like to think that they can go 10-2, but can they afford that second mulligan? After you go out to Southern Cal, even with the bye week, I look at that game at Wisconsin in not too much of a favorable setting for Penn State. I don't care about the bye week. These 18 to 22-year-olds don't know what it's like to travel cross-country in the middle of a school year to play a football game against a tough team. It's not like they're playing San Jose State. They're playing USC, who has just as much of a chance to be competitive in the Big Ten as Penn State. And then you get a bye, and then you go to Wisconsin, who I think is going to be improved. So that's why I'm saying I think 9-3 can get you in maybe as a 10, 11, or 12 seed, because you are going to have other impressive wins, assumedly so, in your schedule, because Big Ten play is that much better now. It's not like you're playing all these different Kent State, Bowling Green, any of these different schools, right? Mercer, that Alabama would schedule at the end of its season, towards the end of its season. There's none of that. You are playing 9 to 10 serious college football games that will determine just how strong your resume is.
Yeah, I mean, if they get in, it's going to be because they earned it. And that's the way it should be. It's freaking Penn State. You shouldn't be afraid of anybody. You're Penn State. So this is what you signed up for to be in the Big Ten.
Yep.
The commissioner signed up for Washington, Oregon, UCLA, and USC. You got to go out and face the music and become a great team. So I know it's difficult, but this is what Penn State fans should want. I'm sure you as a Penn State guy want that. And it's good for the game, man. We need some good news in college football. These kind of games, it's the one thing with the condensed colleges into fewer conferences will bring us. I'm all for that.
Brian, I'm glad you brought up that point, because I was tired of having a 12-game Penn State schedule and only looking forward to 2 of the games. And they were letdowns, Michigan and Ohio State. But it's been that way for the past 2, 3, even longer than that, 2, 3 seasons where Penn State had 2 or 3 games where that's all of them, that the ones that you got up for, and then the rest of them, you just kind of, now this entire schedule outside of one MAC conference game, you have to be on your toes, ready to go, because anything can happen with the new and improved Big Ten. And Penn State's got to keep up with that improvement. They're recruiting left and right. The offseason is here, class of 2025, 26 and beyond. And quarterback's the most important position. Now, they do have somebody already committed in 2025, but they have other prime targets they're looking for. Is one of them trending away from Happy Valley? We're going to discuss that next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Happy Super Bowl Sunday to all who celebrate from FanDuel, the official sportsbook of Locked On. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is about scoring the best seat on the couch, having my favorite football snacks, and placing some super bets. FanDuel has so many ways for you to end the season on a W, or even 2, 3, maybe even more. Not only can you bet on who will win Super Bowl 58, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown, how many points will be scored, and so much more. The player props are already there. If you like Patrick Mahomes' passing yards, Christian McCaffrey rushing yards, Travis Kelce receiving yards, that's all at FanDuel at the moment. New customers, when you join today, you will get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. All you got to do is visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. That is FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. The Locked On Podcast Network is making history. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering each and every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Brian, this is why we have you back on the show, to not only debate these topics and kind of get that third party, that outsider perspective for Penn State, but the recruiting angle of it. Penn State, class of 2025. Junior Day is coming up. So in the final segment, we're going to talk more recruits, but Penn State could be trending away, or I guess the quarterback could be trending away from Penn State. And you're down in SEC country, so you know this all too well. Matt Zollers in Pennsylvania, very good quarterback, has all the intangibles, 6'3", over 200 pounds, mobile, smart, intelligent player as well. And Penn State was one of the first schools to recruit. And in there, it's in their backyard. It's in Pennsylvania. They should be recruiting these types of players. But now as the SEC is getting involved, I said, okay, Missouri's offering him. Nothing really to think about. It's just one school, right? But then Florida gets involved. Kentucky gets involved. Georgia Bulldogs make an offer to some kid in Pennsylvania. That means this kid is legit as a quarterback, as a football player. So if Florida, Georgia, Missouri, Kentucky, all four of them in the span of a week offer Matt Zollers, Penn State's on the right track when they said that they want this quarterback in their class of 2025. But with those offers, I got to imagine that, and from what I'm seeing, Happy Valley Insiders talked about this, Penn State rivals, says that Georgia has Matt Zollers pretty high on their list as quarterbacks they want to take in this class as well. So now there's stiff competition here for Penn State.
Well, this is the new age. I was talking to Zach Blackerby about this on the Auburn show earlier. Auburn's recruiting kids from Utah. That's like sacrilege. I mean, that is as far away from Auburn as you can get socially, politically, everything else. It's just a different world. And that's just a new age we're in. Georgia's quarterback last year was from the Northeast. Yeah. Now it's just kind of a trend. They signed a defensive lineman from New Jersey. I think this is kind of the norm. When I was growing up, Georgia didn't offer kids in Pennsylvania. Those kids went to about 6 schools: Penn State, Pitt, West Virginia, Ohio State, Michigan, Notre Dame. That was it. The main in-state kid. That's about it. Yeah. Now it could be about 20. So it is still a little weird for me, but especially a quarterback, it's the most important position. If you're Georgia, you're going to look a little bit broader sometimes. Maybe this is a kid they want to bring in. They were going to take 2 last year. One of their kids ends up signing with Nebraska. So maybe that's the other thing. Maybe they want 2. That might be part of it. But I would still imagine Zollers goes to Penn State because they were after him early, right? I mean, this is a kid they were, you know what I mean? Like, I know Ryan Montgomery's another kid they offered pretty early, but this kid's in their backyard. Yeah. If they lose him, that's not a good sign, in my opinion.
Yeah, and that's what it comes down to. Really, when I look at this group of 20, there's a lot of good 2025 quarterbacks, and we've seen them. Some of them come off the board and commit elsewhere, but the ones that Penn State has primarily focused on, Malik Washington, they do have the commitment from Bekeem Kritza. So, and I like that one. He's out in Colorado, and look at that, right? We're talking about geography here and people offering different schools, offering different players. He's over in Colorado, and then he's going to come to Happy Valley, and he seems pretty staunch in his commitment here after meeting Andy Kotelnicki at his junior day. Matt Zollers, good news for Penn State, is visiting Penn State this weekend, Saturday, February 3rd, to probably meet Andy Kotelnicki. He's been on campus a lot. It's not like he doesn't like Penn State, but I just think the allure of playing at the SEC, the rumors that Georgia has them up really high, has Zollers up really high on his recruiting board. But what is that? You can't take 3 or 4 quarterbacks. So Penn State kind of has to pick its spot. Are you going to go with Zollers? Are you going to go with Malik Washington? Are you going to go with Ryan Montgomery? And at least the way it seems lately, Ryan Montgomery, I don't want to say that they don't have his attention, but Ryan Montgomery certainly doesn't have Penn State at the top of his big board in this case, from what has been reported, from what it seems based on his latest recruiting. But you got to pick one of them.
Yeah, I mean, in a case like that, I think most coaches would just go with the guy that wants to make a pledge. Now, I'm not speaking for anybody at Penn State, Georgia, or otherwise.
Right.
But that's quarterback. There's like 10 or so that you like. You have a preference, but you don't get a pick when they make their decision. This is what drives college coaches nuts about recruiting, and a lot of them go to the pros. Yeah. Or they don't like recruiting. There's no
Boston College.
Yeah. Oh, well, no comment there. That's wild, by the way. Didn't even get a head job. But at the same time, if you look at it, again, this kid's in state. You've recruited him a long time. You've got a chance to probably play by your sophomore year if you do your right things, and I'm sure they're selling him on that. If you lose these battles, Penn State's not going to be in the playoff every time when they should otherwise. That's just bottom line. You have to score more points. You got to have guys that can make big plays. Kritzka, a guy I saw this past weekend at Battle Miami, he can spin it. If you get this kid too, you have a 1-2 punch. Whoever wins the job wins the job. Yeah. That's what you need. Somebody's transferring out of every class pretty much anyway. Quarterback every other year, you're going to lose a kid. It's just the way it is. You got to have as many bullets in the gun as you can get, man. It's just the way it is.
And that's a good point. With the transfer portal and anybody can transfer in, have eligibility right away. You can play right away. It's also, I think some kids look at it this way. Where can I go and develop right away? Even if my path isn't at Penn State, can I at least get on the right track? And then maybe where I finish is somewhere different. I'm not saying that everybody comes Ethan Grunkmeyer, Bo Pribula, just to talk about current quarterbacks, Jackson Smollett saying, I'm only going to do 2 years at Penn State. That's my plan. And then hopefully they set me up for success somewhere else. That's not what, but they go to these institutions still because they know they're going to get something out of it, even if it ultimately isn't playing time.
Yeah, I mean, you got to find a reason to go to a school or whatever. If you're Kritzka, obviously he likes the coordinator. He's met him, etc. Yeah. Those things matter. After you do that and you get on campus, it's still about competition and competing. The portal will take the kids where it takes them. So I don't even try to worry about it anymore. Just from talking to coaches, they try to get as many good guys as they can get. And what happens after that, you coach the guys that are still on your roster.
Remember, Penn State's in a good situation when you're stacking Drew Aller and then Bo Pribula and then Ethan Grunkmeyer, Jackson Smollett. You have Kritzka committed, potentially Zollers or somebody else. I feel like they're going to get one of the three, whether it's Zollers, Washington, or Montgomery. And you can't go wrong with any of them. You really can't. So I think the preference here is to get Zollers, but if I like Washington, I've seen Washington in person. I've seen Washington at an Elite 11 camp. So I like him a lot. I haven't seen Ryan Montgomery, but I know that he's good, and he's being recruited by SEC country as well. Penn State can't go wrong, and they're in a good position despite all the other quarterbacks that are off the class of 2025 board. They're in a good spot to still get a solid quarterback commitment at some point here. And again, Zollers is on campus for Junior Day for February 3rd, and there's another long list of players that are going to be visiting as well. Who are the names that you need to know? Could Penn State get any other surprise commitments? Remember, Owen Alicini committed, offensive lineman of the class of 2025. Is there another potential for that? Brian and I are going to discuss on the other side of this break. And since we're talking football recruiting on this episode, how about we talk a little job recruiting? Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. It is easy to create a free job post on LinkedIn Jobs, then add your job in the purple hiring frame to let people know, spread the word that you are hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and just the right experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and then hire. That's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. And remember, if you're not already, become an everydayer. Subscribe to Locked On Nittany Lions on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast for the latest analysis around your favorite Penn State sports. And if you want to keep up with what Brian does covering all of the recruiting nationally, you can follow him on X, formerly known as Twitter. And this is a recruiting episode, so today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. Junior Day Part 3, Brian, another long list of high school football prospects coming to visit Happy Valley, some of which are already committed. Some of them have offers. Some of them don't, but are coming to see State College anyway. And I wouldn't say this list could continue to grow over the next, 24 hours or so. This episode is going to be up. go live just the day before when everyone gets to see campus on February 3rd. So Friday, February 2nd, this episode will be up. We already talked about Matt Zollers being on campus, which is huge for Penn State since Zollers has those offers from SEC schools like Georgia, Florida, etc. But there are also a lot of other good players. And Brian, we had this debate the last time that Penn State isn't attracting enough attention from wide receiver, but now there are 3 wide receivers and talented ones at that as well that are going to be visiting Penn State. Desi Jones, Jeff Exener, and Vernon Allen. You saw the list. Are there any other players that catch your eye? And again, it's a long list of offensive players, defensive players, just general athletes that you're like, yeah, Penn State really needs to find a way to land his commitment.
Troutman from New Jersey. He's at a good program, DePaul. That's a program that always has kids, and it's a stop that Penn State's going to make.
Michael Troutman. Yep.
Zaire Addison's a kid that I know personally. He's from the greater Tampa area. I saw him last weekend. He's going to be a left tackle at the major Power 4 level, not Power 5 now. I finally started to remember that.
Yeah.
And that's a kid, if you can get him to visit Pennsylvania in the middle of winter, and he's a kid from the greater Tampa area, that's a good sign. He can go to whatever school he wants. 6'6", 6'5", something like that, 275. He is a pure athlete.
All right.
Those are the 2 kids that kind of stuck out, and that's a long list. But, Zollers, obviously top of the board for them because he's quarterback. But then the rest of the kids, you kind of get them on campus and see who's going to fit in. That's what these are for. New Jersey kids, Maryland kids, the greater East Coast area, and, of course, Pennsylvania. That list is really good. Penn State might get a commitment or 2. It's kind of random. You never know when you're going to get them with these either. So they got a great staff to get kids in and commit. So don't be surprised if that happens with any of them.
So you mentioned Maryland. Well, I already named Jeff Exener, who goes to a familiar school, McDonough, where Penn State has gotten Denai Dennis Sutton, PJ Mustipher, and Curtis Jacobs, just to name a few. So this trend of Penn State having a great relationship with this Maryland high school continues. And Exener is really talented. Exener comes in with a 4-star rating consensus, it seems, and listed at 6'2", 220 pounds. This is the type of player that you need committed to. I would like this kind of player profile in the class of 2023 or 2024 because I feel like they would play right away. But on paper, Exener projects very well in the class of 2025, just simply because Penn State has so many needs at wide receiver. That's really it. He's athletic enough, and he's ranked very highly. He's one of the best players overall in Maryland. So if he enrolls early, maybe we could see him get some traction early on, but that's if he commits.
Well, that's the whole point. Again, you got to bring these kids in and see if your idea for what they should do, the training, your offense, where you're going to play. You're going to play inside, outside, both. That kid can play. He's got offers from a ton of schools. Now, do you want him to fit into your program? The one thing that they don't probably get enough credit for is Penn State's got pretty good culture. You don't hear a lot about the kids getting in a lot of trouble, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. Which kids are we bringing in? Are we going to bolster our roster talent-wise? And then are we also going to get kids that fit what we're trying to do at Penn State University? So they've done a good job of that so far. It's nice to get the guy that weighs 220 that can really run, though. That never hurts.
I'll add to that list Cam Smith. Projects as a linebacker, listed as an athlete according to Rivals, but he is projecting as a linebacker, teammate of Anthony Sacca at St. Joe's Prep. So Sacca was just on campus not too long ago, and Sacca, funny enough, was offered by Manny Diaz, who played a hand in his recruitment early on, and now Manny Diaz, the head coach down at Duke. So you have that recruiting back. I don't know. Duke is a prestigious institution. I will not, especially with what Manny Diaz was able to do in Happy Valley, I am not going to discredit that as a legitimate recruiting battle. But besides the point, it'd be nice to be able to land both of these guys and pitch that, hey, teammates, you don't have to go far from home. You can stay in state from playing at St. Joe's Prep and then going over to Happy Valley, not too far. But Cam Smith, the linebacker, projects very well, and he's also visiting. And we mentioned a lot of offensive players in this case. I thought I'd throw a defensive name out there.
Well, there's nothing wrong with that. Penn State needs players from Maryland and everywhere else, but they want to keep that defense going. You and I both thought they had the best overall defense in the country last year. They should be able to sell that, right? I know Manny left, and he's part of it because it was his defense, but that ought to be pretty attractive. And they're going to lose a lot of guys from last year, and then after this next year, they're going to lose a lot of the guys that were key players. there's playing time to sell too, especially with the kids being in this junior day mostly close to Penn State within a 5-hour radius. I would imagine they'd have a chance to sell that pretty easily. So any kid on that list that comes to Happy Valley this weekend that plays D, that ought to be a pretty easy sell.
And these weekends are very important for not only Andy Kotelnicki to introduce himself, but Tom Allen. I want to mention the fact that DJ McClary, 4-star linebacker, and probably could end up being one of the faces of this class of 2025 if he stays committed. But he committed to Penn State when Manny Diaz was the defensive coordinator, when Manny Diaz was the linebackers coach. And now that is Tom Allen. So Tom Allen's got to make a very good impression for McClary, who's probably meeting him in person for the first time here. Xavier Thomas as well, but McClary has a little more recognition in this case since he's high up in the recruiting rankings. Thomas still getting started here, but Penn State took a commitment from him, so they obviously think he's good despite what the sites say. But my point overall is the fact that just because these players are verbally committed, these junior days are just as important, maintaining and still almost re-recruiting them in this case because they committed when somebody else was coaching at Penn State.
That's right. You got to find, okay, what's Tom Allen like? Yep. What's the deal? Why should I go play for him? How's he going to help me get to the next level? All these kids want to get to the NFL. That's not a news flash, but that's what all the kids will tell me. I was at Battle Miami last weekend and talking to recruits. I want to go to a school that can help me develop me to the highest level, NFL. Mm-hmm. That phrase is used over and over. By the way, Tom Allen has serious ties to Tampa and Central Florida. So
he does.
It's going to be a really interesting deal with him recruiting down there. He got kids from Florida to Indiana, so I'd imagine it won't be that hard to get them to Happy Valley. So I think they're going to do pretty well there, but I'm curious to see how he recruits in the defensive staff in general now that Manny's down at Duke. How do they recruit some of the local kids that Tom may not have as many connections with in New Jersey, a school like McDonough or whatever in Maryland? Mm-hmm. He's a fun guy, but either you know people or you don't. That's why you have these junior days. It's so important for him, really, because he's the new guy on the block at Penn State.
Yeah.
And it's an opportunity to show himself in a good light.
Brian, as always, appreciate the time, the expert analysis, and all that you provide to the show when we have you on as a weekly guest. Thanks so much again, and can't wait to do it all over with more recruiting news as it pours in here. It doesn't stop, so I'm glad we have you here at the Locked On Podcast Network.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.